Okay, welcome. A few weeks ago, we sat on the Mount of the Beatitudes, listening to the Sermon on the Mount and catching some little glimpses of the lake in the background. And today we're going to take the time to really spend some time on the lake and think about Jesus' ministry on the lake, which we call the Sea of Galilee, and around the Sea of Galilee. So we're going to pull up those slides for you and just get started. Okay, here we are, and nice map of the Holy Land. You can see the Sea of Galilee right here, about 6 miles from east to west, about 12 miles from north to south. It is, in fact, the surface of the Sea of Galilee is about 700 feet below sea level, the lowest freshwater lake in the world. The Dead Sea down here, the surface is about 1,400 feet below sea level, the lowest salt sea in the world. This valley is actually part of the Great Rift Valley that runs all the way down into Eastern Africa, for those of you who are into ancient anthropology. So the Sea of Galilee, about 6 miles by 12 miles, about 150 feet deep. A very lovely freshwater lake, and we're going to visit it this afternoon. Okay, here we go. The shore, this is on the eastern shore. Parts of the shore are very lovely and grassy, and a lovely beach here. This happens to be a tourist occupation, where the people who are visitors and pilgrims can stay for a while. Parts of the shore are sandy or rocky, and parts of the shore are still very reedy and marshy, and that will come into play later when we talk about the boat. This is probably also a good time to give thanks to my student David, who took along a good camera and shared with me his slides. So when you see one that's exceptionally beautiful like this, it probably was from his stash, which he kindly shared with me. There are a few fishermen yet on the Sea of Galilee, though not nearly as many as there were in Jesus' day. Sea of Galilee, a lovely freshwater lake, as I said, about 150 feet deep, and usually quite calm because of the hills all the way around, protecting it from winds. But there are a few openings, a few valleys, and if a really nasty wind happens to come down through one of those valleys, it'll come out into the basin and swirl around and around and make things very nasty in a very short amount of time. So, and that of course factors into a couple of the stories from the Gospels. That's the hillside that you saw earlier that we associate with the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who recognize their need for God, for they are entering the kingdom of heaven. Just a bit south of that hillside is are the cliffs of Arbel in the Wadi Hamoun. At the foot of the cliffs, the Wadi Hamoun, or Valley of Doves, is where Jesus and his disciples would have walked as they walked from Nazareth, or Nain, to Capernaum, back to home base. In doing that, they would have walked right through the plain of Magdala, which is right here, and you'll recognize that perhaps. Mary of Magdala, or who you know sometimes as Mary Magdalene, from this area. So they would have walked right through her hometown. She's important in the Gospels. She is the first one to hear those words. He is not here, he is risen, just as he said, go tell the others. And she was the first to go with the news of the resurrection. So, important person in the history of the Gospels. Her hometown, Magdala, is being excavated right now, which is very exciting. Some wonderful stuff being found there. This is the boat that was found in 1986. In 1986, the water level was very low, and a couple of brothers were walking in one of those marshy, reedy areas of the lake that, like we showed you earlier, and they found this boat in the mud, just apparently had been abandoned there, was worn out and abandoned many, many years ago. And eventually it was lifted and salvaged and put here in the museum. The media, of course, dubbed it immediately the Jesus boat because it is a first century boat, but the archaeologists simply prefer to call it the first century boat. It's about 27 feet long, about 7 feet wide, and about 3 to 4 feet deep. You will occasionally hear that it was composed of 12 different kinds of wood, but actually it was composed of 2 kinds of wood. The planks were of cedar and the ribs were of oak. But when something broke, they just grabbed, whatever was available and patched it. And so we wound up at the end with 12 different kinds of wood, but it was not constructed of 12 different kinds of wood. This does remind us, though, that wood is very scarce all over Israel, still is, was in Jesus' day also, so they had to get by with a lot of scrap lumber. Now, this also has some implications for the task that Jesus inherited from his earthly father Joseph and what exactly they worked with, but we'll get back to that another time. Artist has done a wonderful job of reconstructing what the boat would have looked like before it sat in the reeds for 2,000 years. A sail, so you can catch the wind when there's a favorable wind, and either 4 or 6 folks rowing, and then a place to sleep in the stern, which of course is where Jesus was sound asleep on a pillow as they were headed across the lake and were hit by that terrible storm. So, in Jesus' day, there would have been a lot more fishing on the lake. There are still some fishers there now, but not nearly as many as then, and not nearly as many villages. You can see here that all the little harbors, each one of these represents a fishing village from the first century. Many, many little fishing villages. The Galilee in Jesus' day was a bustling, bustling place of small farms and small fishing operations and small tradespeople of various kinds. Not true today, which was surprising for me. The population is lower today than it was in Jesus' day. But if you drive through rural Iowa or rural Nebraska, you will recognize the dynamic. There are way fewer people today in rural Iowa and rural Nebraska than there were 100 years ago. And there are fewer villages, and the villages that are there are smaller in size because of the depopulation of the rural area. Well, that affected this area also. You have now one significant city, which is Tiberias. Most of these little villages are gone, and you have little chapels and churches and national parks and campgrounds and wonderful stuff. But it's not bustling with small fisheries like it was in Jesus' day. This is an artist's reconstruction of what one of those harbors would have looked like. The marine archaeologists who know what they're looking for can actually find the remnants of these breakwaters, these docks, places where nets could be spread and cleaned, and where fish could be unloaded and then sold. And we'll come back to Capernaum in a different time. So let's talk a little bit about some of the events around the Sea of Galilee, Jesus' ministry. Home base in Capernaum. One event, they were sailing across this direction toward Kirsty when they were hit with a violent storm. And the disciples eventually woke Jesus and he stilled the storm. Peace, be still. That would have been about here. They landed on the shore. Man came down from the tombs, harassed by evil forces, and Jesus stilled the storm on the shore as he had stilled the storm on the lake. Up here, Bethsaida, house of fishing, the original home of Simon Peter and Andrew, and also of Philip. Bethsaida would have been, it's very near the hillside where the feeding of the 5,000 took place, up here on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. And that's why when you read in John chapter 6, Andrew and Simon Peter and Philip all factor in that conversation. It's because that's their hometown where this is taking place. Coming also then from there, at one point, the disciples are sailing this direction. Jesus has gone into the hills to pray. They are sailing west this time. Another sharp little storm comes up, and Jesus comes to them, walking on the water. Farther around here to the western shore, near Capernaum, this is where they would have been fishing in the lake, and Jesus was walking on the shore and said, "Come, follow me, I will make you fishers of men." That would have taken place here. And then finally, one more important event, the very, very end of the gospel stories, John chapter 21. Jesus has a little charcoal fire, and the disciples are on the boat early in the morning mist. They see someone on the shore, do not recognize who he is, but eventually he invites them to come ashore, and this is where he has that great conversation with Peter. Peter, do you love me more than these? So, okay. My students used to tell me every great slideshow ends with a sunset. So here's our sunset on the Sea of Galilee. Beautiful little lake, very freshwater lake, and very lovely. So we're going to drop those slides here a moment. And we want to end with a song today. Just a very powerful song that you might remember from way back when. Jesus calls us o'er the tumult of our life's wild, restless sea. Day by day his sweet voice soundeth, saying, "Christian, follow me." As of old apostles heard it by the Galilean lake, turned from home and toil and kindred, leaving all for his dear sake. Jesus calls us, by thy mercies, Savior, may we hear thy call. Give our hearts to thine obedience, love and serve thee best of all. Okay, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.